Good morning. Welcome to Friday Vibe. Hi, Maria. Hi, Stuart. How are you doing?
Morning.
Morning, very good, thank you.
Oh, Maria, that wasn't a very high energy morning this morning.
Oh,
What's going on?
sorry. I was trying to be high energy. Morning.
Where are you?
Better? No.
Very good. Yes, we're going to be discussing the discussion we had during the week, which was on the future of work. And reflections on it were quite interesting because, in a lot of ways, I think, Stuart, you pointed this out, that we didn't, in a way, follow the agenda. We were going to talk about technology and we were going to talk about leadership. But I think the technology discussion went in a familiar way when we put that on the agenda. Stuart, what are your thoughts on the whole technology conversation?
Yeah, I mean, we obviously the whole subject is about future of work, and we wanted to talk about, I guess, how technology, is enabling, empowering, and can be, certainly leveraged to enable different, working patterns and flexible working arrangements, etc., etc. And there's a lot of tech out there today to help this sort of stuff. And we immediately started to tick off around technology, and I guess within 2 minutes, if that, we didn't talk about technology. We talked about the operating models and various other things, which was a great conversation. So, but it's very interesting that even our own audience, I guess, frayed away from talking about technology. So I guess I don't know whether this is a hypothesis or an observation, but I think one of the issues in this space is people are just ignorant or just lack understanding around what technology is out there and how it can really help some of these operating models. And actually, certainly now in the circles we're operating, people are just seem not prepared or able or willing to talk about it, which again is, I guess, is an observation that says, do they actually understand it enough to understand what's out there and how it can actually help them, right?
So I'm going to jump straight in here. I think it's the last of those three. I think it's willing. I think as things have developed over the last 20 or 30 years, I think the technology discussion, talking about the actual technology itself, is more and more difficult to do. I think the gap in knowledge, which you talk about, I think is getting wider and wider. We can see it with almost all the technologies we have. The most successful ones don't rely on people having any technical knowledge. You thought smartphone, it's got to be the ultimate answer. As soon as smartphone became push this button, we'll do all the thinking, you navigate and you can't break it. It becomes something that people can use in their busy lives. So this again, it might be a theme of our conversation today. This is nothing new. We've seen this coming over the last 10, 15 years. We've all been at conferences. I've hosted conferences, chaired conferences, and the technology people want to talk about the technology, but people end up talking about the business case or the processes around it. They don't really want to engage with the technology, and I think it's causing a problem. We can see that getting wider and wider. Maria, I would guess you're in the same camp here, where you sit between the two. You use a lot of the technology to help call centers over the years. And is that gap getting wider between people that understand it, or do people want to engage with it? What are you seeing?
Yes, I do sit in the camp. I think there is a gap. And my take on it is that as the barriers to engaging with technology have lowered, the risk to do or try technology has also lowered. So if I take myself as an example, 15 years ago, if I wanted to do something born out of a business strategy, I would go and find an experiment and learn from so, someone in that space, software developer, learn a bit, experiment a bit, create a proof of concept, use that as part of the business case, take that to the business, and then we'd sort of see where we would go from there. But I think as the barriers to technology have lowered through the sort of technology as a subscription, so buying in tech,
Sure. Yeah.
great, because it means that more people can do more stuff, right? But businesses have become consumers of the technology rather than explorers of the technology, or create things through technology. And I think the appetite for risk has probably lowered as well. So a contact center director or a CX director is probably now less likely to kind of venture off on their own to do something, because they would perceive the risk as too high. And that's that gap in education that I think Stuart was alluding to, the ignorance. So that's sort of my take on it. It's sort of got this weird paradox of we can use a lot more, but because we're consuming it, we're not sort of exploring in that space anymore, or less.
Yeah, I do remember back in the days when I was running a company that had a studio, the Mac users group was really strong, and they would go and talk to each other and explore something online in something new and revolutionary called chat rooms. And they would go and explore. You're absolutely right. They'd go and explore the latest Mac development before they jumped in, before they felt confident with it and the some of the bugs and issues it had, and that they could fix those before they jumped in. Interesting point of view. Stuart, you've with with Atom Bank, technology was at the heart of the bank in a lot of ways. It's sort of, I think bank in a box is a phrase you'd recognise. So how did those dynamics play out? Because not all of you could have understood the technology.
I think to a degree we were hiring people that had a level of technical literacy, in all roles. So it wasn't just in technology. Obviously, you implying the software developers for their software development skills at the end of the day, but you wanted people across the whole business to understand the art of technology, digital banking, at its forefront. And therefore, everyone had to have a level of, technology savviness, right? Now, it doesn't mean that everyone could program. This is my point, but at least they had an awareness that was probably much higher than, I guess, a traditional bank would have, right? In a traditional bank, in traditional roles in finance, HR, they wouldn't necessarily know what a digital bank meant, right? Whereas in Atom, everyone absolutely understood digitization, right? They understood the art of the possible. But part of it also then was the remit. So as chief technology officer, which I spent a number of years, I was chief operating officer then and chief technology officer in different times. But the role as chief technology was to ensure that you were bringing that knowledge to the executive table, right? It wasn't a case of being an order taker to go off and just deliver. It was bringing, the art of the possible and what's new, what's forthcoming. I had solution architects and enterprise architects that were looking at the futures and looking at new technologies and looking at how we could exploit stuff to improve customer experience and employee experience and shareholder experience in its wider context, right? So you're constantly educating the art of the possible. That was the role.
And it's interesting because you've just described exactly what was happening back in the day when we were introducing Mac into the studio. I wonder if that's what's missing. I wonder if that will and that determination to get enough knowledge, enough understanding into businesses. I wonder if that's the bit that is missing, that then causes a lot of the failures we've seen. And it's interesting because you're right, the conversation moved away from the technology straight away, but it did move into the gig economy, which is a phrase that's, again, nothing new. That's been around for 10, 15 years. But during that conversation, people were talking about bringing in the expertise, and that expertise being more available through apps, etc., where you could cut it. I mean, traditionally, Maria, we would bring in consultants, but now perhaps we can just bring in the people. So, Maria, are you advocating that people need to do more of their own investigation into the tech? Is that what you think is needed?
I think there has to be, like Stuart said, there has to be a level of education and a knowledge bank that sits within the business, and an appetite for the business to want to explore that together as a team, or some micro teams that sort of sit within the business. So I think the will and the appetite and a certain level of education has to sit inside the business camp, definitely. And then, but then how do you, who and how you go on this quest with, it is then sort of up to you how you do that. Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes bringing in outside perspectives, often bringing in outside or left field perspectives is fantastic. You know, I've worked in, you know, for clients where they've wanted a solution and not really known how to get there, not really struggled to sort of get clarity of thinking. So we've kind of, you know, engaged 6 different credible people to come up with 6 different solutions in order to stimulate the thought and try and bring about some clarity of direction. And that's obviously one model that you can use. But yeah, I think the will has to live within the business to explore and educate. But then how you bring in people to show or help you see the art of the possible, I think can come from anywhere. And that's the great thing about the modern world, is that, you know, you could speak to someone in any culture and, you know, from anywhere in the world, and they can bring something to the table.
See, it's interesting. I'm reflecting back now. A few years ago, I was working with a large telco on the enterprise area, and they showed me something that was quite interesting. The company that they were supplying to said, "Can you answer these 4 questions? 1, 2, 3, 4, and we want only 3 bullet points on each of them." And I'm just reflecting back now. That was such a lack of engagement and wanting to explore. They were buying a very complex service, and they had boiled it down to 4 questions, 3 bullet points on each, which is about as far away from exploring the richness of what was being offered as you can get. And I wonder if that's one of the things that's happened, is that people haven't got the time, or they pride themselves with cutting out some of the complexity, when it's understanding the complexity that keeps you safe. What are your thoughts, Stuart?
Yeah, I think there's some of that. I think there's, I mean, if I take this just back to the gig economy type conversation, I think from a company perspective, flexible resourcing models, play a role for I guess for a number of reasons. But the 2 core reasons is, one is where your volume of resourcing is going up and down like a yo-yo, and therefore you need to flex your resourcing up and down to deal with that. And therefore, the gig economy or contracting resources, 0-hour resources can play a significant role to fill those gaps. The other is skill. Back then, I guess it's more to your point. You might be lacking a certain skill, but you don't need that skill all the time. You need it for the next 3 months, 6 months. And therefore, you might tap into contract/gig economy style resourcing to fill skill gaps, right? And I think as an organization, you need to be thinking about what are the core competencies that are future-proof that you need in the organization forever and a day. And that's always hard, and it's always changing, by the way, but at least you're trying to future-proof it 5, 6, 7, 10 years out. And even if it's a core competency, if you don't think you can hire and retain that skill, then you're better off tapping into a partner or into flexible resourcing models that is a more cost-effective way of dealing with it, right? So, but you need to consciously think through what are those core competencies versus not core, and even if it's core, can you maintain it? Can you grow it? Can you nurture it yourself? Can you retain it versus tapping into something that's external? I think there's also a different angle, which is looking at it from an individual's perspective, which is an individual perspective. Yeah, it's definitely a growing market that people are looking for flexible working arrangements. Not everyone. Some people want the security, and working for one company is more than enough, right? But there's other people that absolutely want the variety, want to work for multiple companies, want the choice, want to have the choice of when and where they work, how they work. And therefore, this whole sort of a gig economy, or not necessarily gig, but contracting economy, is still thriving and growing because people are choosing that type of lifestyle, that type of flexibility, that choice.
And it hasn't gone away, has it? That's the thing about that whole flexible piece, is it hasn't gone away, and it's only getting broader. It was interesting, we had Tony on the call talking about higher education, and it's not really on their radar where it should be. And they should be helping people understand how that works, because that's quite a complex skill set actually to work in a flexible manner. And it was interesting to see how the technology is enabling that. I really do. I think from the conversation, buying in as you need it, those competencies is something that is really strong. And there was I think a lot of people could see that being a big part of the future, but not in the way that perhaps it was done traditionally, which is consultants. It was actually just getting the individual in, which seems to me like something that's progressing. Maria, would you agree with that?
Yes, I would, although I think there is still something to be said for I still think there's something to be said for sort of having a partnership with a company that can offer those skills. There is a certain safety in that rather than relying on an individual, because you get all the risks that come with an individual. Whereas I think there's there's a sort of mixed model, I think, that perhaps can be played out here, where you sort of have, like Stuart said, the core competencies and the will that you want to live within your business, and then where perhaps you can't fulfill that or maintain that, then look to partnerships that you can build over a long period of time. So there's a real trusted relationship there, and then skilled individuals that can come in and deliver areas that might preserve or indeed take your advance your business in a way that you want, and maybe they turn into partnerships over time as well, depending on what the kind of agendas of both parties are.
Yeah, I agree. It's interesting as you were talking there in this discussion this morning. I think there's another element to this. When we talk about responsible business, we quite often wonder and look in amazement at how some situations have arisen. The post office being one, a very famous one that we discussed a couple of times, but there's been others as well. And the conclusion we come to is everybody's too indoctrinated in the business, and nobody's bringing a fresh perspective in. And part of what we were discussing about responsible business was perhaps you do need to step outside of your company to think, is this the right thing to do? Now, we've had some news today, or the last couple of days, about the Harrods situation, which is absolutely horrendous. And if it plays out the way it looks like it's going to play out, that's a really bad situation. What is interesting from our point of view is that we're starting to hear that there are people that were complicit in allowing that to happen. And it was the same as the post office and some of the others. And we're thinking, how does that manifest itself within a company? Do people leave their morals and ethics at home? What are your thoughts, Stuart, on this dynamic we've seen in quite a few things over the last 6 months?
I agree. I mean, whether it's that case or others, I think your point is that obviously the root of the issue is disgusting. I mean, there's no other word for it. Right? But this is the complicity that I guess concerns me equally as much, which is, people would have known this is breaking the law. This is not about protecting a brand. This is a criminal act, right? And in all these scenarios, they're all criminal acts. Not sharing evidence, and there must have been, by the sounds of things, and obviously we don't know the details, but I'm assuming there was compromise agreements and all sorts of things being created to, as there were in the US cases, the Me Too type stories, where people were being shown. But this is criminality. I mean, how can you defend a situation which is a criminal act? I just don't understand. Back to your point, the morals and ethics. No matter how much you might love the company and love what the company stands for, this is criminality. And therefore, to not stand up for what's right, to be the whistleblower, to stand apart and do the right thing in a responsible fashion, to me, is mind blowing.
It is, isn't it? When you're outside of it and you look into it, we've had Jimmy Savile and all these things over the years. We've had the newsreader now, haven't we? And there's evidence that it's crazy. What are your thoughts, Marie, on how these not the people that commit the offence themselves? That's probably a whole different ballgame of things. But people that are complicit in it, how do you think that manifests itself? What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I'm always reminded of when these situations arise of how conformist we are and how much we like the herd as human beings, right? So and I think when you add in the sort of institutional aspect or company aspect, you end up with a bit of a boiling the frog scenario where the heat gets turned up so slowly that you don't quite realize that you're being boiled to death, because everything becomes normalized. So every little thing becomes more, something that might shock you 5 years ago, it becomes normalized. And that's that's true of any we talk about it a lot in customer experience, don't we? In the absolute converse, where we talk about a great thing, great innovation that happens in customer experience, then just becomes a normal expectation, and then we have to kind of go after the next thing. And I know that's going slightly off the topic, but the fact is that people will always stand by and conform because it's in our nature to do that, particularly when things that companies or individuals within companies do become just part of the ritual of being in a business. The folklore of he's a bit of this or she's a bit like that. We let that. I don't think there's a working person on the planet that hasn't let something go, not to that extent, but hasn't sort of accepted it's a bad behavior at some point. So so in terms of that, I think that's just who we are as human beings, and that's maybe why bringing outside people in can be so good, because it forces you to hold a mirror up to yourself as an organization, perhaps, and your ways of working.
Yeah, and it's proof that a strong culture is not always a good thing.
Well, it's not when you. And this is I know I bang on a lot about company values, and I do believe that they have a place of belonging. I think there's a noble intention there, but a lot of the time it ends up in an exercise in assimilation and expectation of conformity, rather than sort of diversity and belonging.
Yeah,
unfortunately.
I think it's. We've been discussing responsible business and how we're going to produce something that will help individuals taking a responsible position. And you quite quickly get into a conversation about responsible to who. Are we responsible to to our colleagues? Are we responsible to the shareholders? Are we responsible to our leaders? And that becomes an interesting conversation. Or are we responsible for our own morals, ethics, and values? That becomes a very interesting conversation quite quickly. I help a lot of people with followship. We talk a lot about leadership, but following is quite an art as well. And how do you follow but retain yourself and not surrender completely? So these are the things I think we need to be considering when we put something together. That how do we help people to a certain extent be separate from their company and have a level where the brakes come on and the red warning lights go on and say this is wrong, but also have the ability to also work and pull in the direction of the company. What are your thoughts, Stuart?
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, to your point, there's numerous stakeholders involved in any business, and the art of being responsible is optimizing the needs of them all, isn't it? And being eyes wide open, and that balance can be sometimes very, very difficult, and you may have to, for very, very good reasons, have to prioritize one over others for a period of time. But you know, companies and individuals need to do that eyes wide open and know what the risks are, the impacts are, and what are they doing, in order to make sure they're optimizing the right decisions to then, you know, balance back out better as times move on, right? But and that's easy. It's easy for us to say. It can be incredibly complex as an individual, and I think very few individuals would look at what they are doing day to day against all their stakeholders, right? And I think that's the issue. And this education is much more around ensuring that people are aware of that broader stakeholder group and the impacts they're making.
Yeah, but Maria, what are your thoughts on that sort of at a personal level, how we make responsible decisions?
Well, I mean, we all know how to do it because we do it in our lives. So or not, yeah, maybe we don't. But I think, as Stuart said, you have to sort of, you know, when we go to work and we work for a company, we often get lost in the job, in the task at hand, and the consideration of whose interests are we doing this for? Who are we responsible to when we make this decision? Is hugely important, and we have so much information at our fingertips, some of it not valuable, some of it really valuable, that you know, but do people within individuals within businesses consider who they're responsible to other than their boss? Who are their true stakeholders? All of, you know, as seeing out as wide as they possibly can. I don't know if people have the space and the time to explore that. Similarly to technology, where we start.
I was just going to say the same thing. We're back to where we were.
The time and space to be explorative these days, or to daydream. I don't know.
I think every time we come around this conversation, time is a factor here, and I think giving ourselves time to make these conversations has got to be something that we include in this, because otherwise we can't properly assess the evidence, and we go on instinct. Sometimes instinct can be really good, and sometimes instinct can let us down. Anyone who's read Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow understands the dynamics of that. Sometimes we can overthink it and make mistakes. Sometimes we can just rely on our associated memories, and that can lead us down the road as well. So I think time and to consider these things, and perhaps having a forward plan, perhaps having something that we use as a checklist may be good in these situations. Final thoughts from you, Stuart, on this?
Yeah, no, I completely agree with the conversation. I think there's you know, in all of this, there's education required, isn't there? There's education on technology. That's a fantastic opportunity for anybody out there to help educate people in the use and how they can exploit technology to better their business. Equally, there's education required on actually how to balance the decisions you're making across the whole of your stakeholder group in a responsible fashion, right? And never to lose sight of that broader stakeholder group. And I think that, that's high on our agenda to try and deliver.
Yeah. Perfect. Thank you, everybody. That's the end of Vibe today. We got through 30 minutes really quickly. So have a good weekend, everybody. We've got another discussion coming up next week on AI, I think. And we'll see if we can keep it in the technology, Stuart, for more than 30 seconds, or will we get pulled out straight away? So thank you very much, guys, and have a good weekend.